Okay, let's dive into this because today we're tackling a frustration that honestly almost every educator has faced at some point in their career. You know the drill. You spend hours, literally hours, before the school year starts crafting what you think is the perfect list of classroom rules. You put them up on this beautiful, colorful poster, which, let's be real, becomes practically invisible to your students by week 2. Right? You review them with all this enthusiasm on day 1, and then bam, chaos. So, why do these super well-intentioned rules just completely fall apart? Well, in this explainer, we're going to look at the actual architecture of actionable rules. We'll uncover exactly why unclear expectations are setting both you and your students up for a pretty massive struggle. Students can't follow rules they don't fully understand. I mean, it sounds incredibly simple, doesn't it? Almost like basic common sense. But honestly, I really need you to let this sink in for a second. Because this harsh reality, it's the absolute foundation of the vague rule problem that literally plagues learning environments everywhere. You see, as adults, we kind of just assume that our students share our nuanced understanding of behavioral concepts. But here's the thing. When a student acts out, it's actually very rarely some calculated, malicious rebellion. More often than not, it is simply a fundamental breakdown in communication. Think about it. If the rule isn't crystal clear in their minds, they physically cannot adhere to it. They aren't defying you, they're just confused. And that is exactly where we really need to rethink our approach from the ground up. And that brings us directly to a really important concept we call the ambiguity trap. Okay, I want you to imagine you're a student for a second. Maybe you're 8 or 9 years old, or heck, even a teenager. You walk into a whim, and the teacher tells you to, quote, be a good citizen, or maybe show a positive attitude. Now, those are wonderful, noble ideals. They look absolutely fantastic on a syllabus. But here is the trap. Those are incredibly abstract concepts. I mean, what does good citizenship actually look like on a random Tuesday morning when you're just trying to figure out if you're allowed to get up and sharpen your pencil? When we rely on these broad philosophical concepts, we accidentally create an environment of complete guesswork. And trust me, when you have 25 different kids all guessing what a rule means, you don't get harmony. You get chaos. You're effectively asking them to read your mind, which is frankly a completely impossible standard to meet. Now, what's really interesting about this is when we contrast a philosophical ideal with a totally practical instruction. Take the phrase, be respectful. That is probably the most common classroom rule in the world, right? But listen, to one student, being respectful might mean staying absolutely quiet. To another student, it might mean enthusiastically calling out an answer because, hey, they're super eager to engage with your lesson. And to a third student, respect might literally just mean not tipping their chair back. It means entirely different things to different people based on their background and personality. Now contrast that with the clear expectation to raise your hand before speaking. See the difference? There is zero ambiguity here. It's undeniably clear. It doesn't rely on a student's mood or their personal interpretation of respect. It is a physical action that is either happening or it isn't. By making this simple shift, you're actively removing that friction of interpretation. So the big takeaway here is that we must transition away from vague concepts and move towards actionable expectations. What's that? Well, an actionable expectation is simply a rule that deliberately removes confusion and builds consistency. And think about what consistency actually does for a learning environment. It's huge. When students know exactly what is expected of them, their anxiety naturally drops. They don't have to spend all this precious cognitive energy trying to decode the teacher's mood or decipher some vague poster on the wall. Instead, they can focus all of that brainpower on actually learning the material. So by utilizing actionable expectations, you completely eliminate the student guesswork. You're telling them the exact rules of the game, and that empowers them to succeed, establishing a highly consistent, safe, and predictable classroom. Let's move on and see how this builds into our blueprint for classroom rules. So, we've firmly established that ambiguity is the enemy and actionable expectations are the absolute goal. But how do we actually construct those, right? How do we audit our current rules and fix them? Well, we need a reliable system. This blueprint is your toolkit. It's how you take those lofty, well-intentioned ideas and firmly ground them in reality. And the best part? Whether you're teaching kindergartners who are experiencing a classroom for the very first time or high school seniors preparing for graduation, the architecture of an effective rule remains exactly the same. It requires a very specific checklist to ensure that it will actually hold up in the wild, day-to-day reality of a busy classroom. Here's the checklist. Every single rule in your classroom must hit 3 exact components to actually work. Number 1, It must be specific. Something like, do your best is definitely not specific, but bring your textbook, notebook, and 2 pencils to class. Now that is brilliantly specific. Number 2, it must be observable. Honestly, this is perhaps the absolutely crucial one on the list. Can you literally see it happening? You can't observe a student being polite, but you can absolutely observe a student keeping their hands and feet to themselves. A really great trick here is to ask yourself, if a camera were recording the room right now, would it capture the rule being followed? And finally, number 3, it must be easy to remember. Look, if your rule is a whole paragraph long, it's already failed. It needs to be a concise, punchy directive that a student can recall in a split second. If a rule misses even one of these pillars, it opens the door right back up to that ambiguity trap. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a direct challenge. Take a mental walk through your own learning space right now. Think about the syllabus you handed out on day 1 or the guidelines you verbally reinforce every single day. Are you relying on noble ideals, or are you relying on clear actions? Because when you transform those broad concepts into specific, observable, and memorable directives, it's a real game changer. You will watch just how quickly the confusion completely disappears from your students' faces. So take a step back and ask yourself this one fundamental question. Are your classroom rules actually observable?